I do recall realizing if we don't have hell, we don't have anything in this religion. It all fell apart. That was the basis of my desire to be a missionary, so people would not have to experience this permanent, eternal, tormenting afterlife. And if that doesn't exist, then what's the point of anything?
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 61. Before I jump into today's introduction for today's guest, I just want to give everyone an update on where we're at with things just in our personal life. Christy and I are, we have completed the process of all the home improvements that we were doing. I'm currently sitting in the hallway with my computer, and there's like a few laundry baskets around, some camping chairs, a TV, and that's about it. So we've been kind of living with very few things. Everything else is in the garage ready to be moved. So we are in the process of closing the deal with our house. So that's about to happen, hopefully. Just finalizing that. But if you hear kitchen noise, or if you hear doors shutting behind me, those probably my teenage boys walking by or something. So it's been a month since I put an episode out, a little bit over a month, so I just wanted to find a way to get this done. So this is what we're going to do. Anyhow, before I introduce today's guest, I just want to say to Dana in particular, thank you so much for being so patient. I really appreciate it. It's been several months since we recorded the interview, and I just can't thank you enough for being so understanding about the whole process. And to all of you listeners out there as well, thank you so much for waiting. And it's been a crazy couple of months between going on a family vacation, and as fun as that was, it was busy, and then coming home and getting the house ready to sell. It's just been nuts. So there have been a lot more delays than normal, and I'm grateful just to everybody for hanging in there. With that said, I'd like to introduce today's guest. She was raised in an evangelical Baptist church and home in California. She was homeschooled from kindergarten through 6th grade and survived child abuse until she left her hometown to pursue academic training in missionary work. She completed several mission trips in preparation for full-time ministry before concluding that she could not participate in the field. She deconverted from Christianity in her 20s and began working to help others do the same by hosting a support group in Chicago and being outspoken about her experiences on social media and in an interview with the Chicago Tribune in 2013. She has a biblical studies degree from New Tribes Bible Institute and a BA in applied linguistics from Moody Bible Institute. She received her master's in special education from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She is a political activist in her community and a teacher, tutor, and therapist to children with diverse needs. She actively seeks to help abolish white supremacy and misogyny, and is currently writing a book on deconversion, specifically from the view of intersectional feminism. Something she said that really I just absolutely loved, and I think a lot of you will resonate with. Near the end of the interview, she says, "I felt like God had saved me. Having to realize I saved myself, that was huge." And with that, here's my interview with Dana Smith. All right, well, I am joined today by Dana Smith. Dana, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, well, the first question I always start with is just, how do you identify as far as religious stuff goes? So if someone were to ask you, are you an atheist or agnostic, how do you answer that question, or how would you answer it?
I would say that I lean toward agnosticism. I am not a theist. I do tend to relate more to this belief that there is a universal consciousness. I would not say that I necessarily believe in intelligent design, but I'm a very big fan of science and astronomy and science fiction. So I really love to think about possibilities.
Cool.
So I will probably mention more later why I'm not a big fan of the atheist movement necessarily.
Oh,
So I would
yeah.
not identify as an atheist.
No, that's good. I always, it's funny. Sometimes I'm like, why do I even ask that question? Because usually people, in some ways, you might think like, oh, it's just going to be like, oh, I'm an atheist or oh, I'm agnostic. But people
Mm.
always seem to have thought that through pretty thoroughly, and each person has a pretty thorough response or pretty like thoughtful response. So that's interesting, and I'm kind of excited to hear about what those things are that kind of turns you away from atheism. So, um, but why don't we jump into your story? We can get to some of that stuff later. Um,
Okay.
yeah. Well, I guess start from the beginning and just let me know, like, how did Christianity influence you as you were growing up, when you were younger?
Okay, here we go. So I,
Just jump right
I
in. Yeah.
are you ready? I was born in Central California in a big town called Fresno.
Okay.
California may not seem to many people like the most conservative area. It's known for more of its liberal pockets, but because the Central Valley is a valley, it tends to maintain the stronghold of right wing ideologies. So there are a lot of churches in Central California. My parents converted to evangelical Christianity when they were in college, and they met at their college youth group, and I am their oldest child.
Mm.
So I was born into a Baptist church and family, and I was in that church until I was 20 years old and moved away.
Wow. So just Baptist the whole time.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
very consistent in that sense. We never moved. Um, I Some of my earliest memories include my mother reading me this picture book story of Mary Slessor, who was a Scottish missionary to the continent of Africa. And I remember, and this is such an early memory, it's a bit blurry, but I must have been in preschool or even a toddler. And I remember the pictures being so colorful and vibrant, and it really spoke to me. And I just love the story about her adventurous life as a single woman, fighting off wild animals and being this white savior heroine to the African people she was ministering to, I say in quotes.
Right.
So that was one of my earliest memories. We spent multiple days a week in church. We weren't just a Sunday church going family. And our church when I was younger was quite small, well, small compared to what it ended up being, but a few hundred families. So it was a very
Okay.
tight knit group. It was very homogenous, very white, middle to upper class. It was quite conservative as far as theology. They had a close relationship with the Southern Baptist Convention. So
Okay.
anyone familiar with SBC, you could probably understand the kind of things.
Yeah, that's a big, and that's a pretty politically powerful organization too.
Yes, it is. And a lot of the missionaries our church supported were through SBC or even in some independent missionaries, but we were very much siloed against other denominations. It was very clear to me from a young age that we were Baptist and we were the right denomination.
That's so crazy because it's so common. And I was talking to someone who was raised Catholic, and they did the same thing. It's like we thought the Catholics were bad. The Catholics thought we were bad, and then the Lutherans didn't like the whatever, Jehovah's Witnesses, and everybody's like, "We're the right one."
Exactly. I remember my one of my sisters saying to me one day when we were teenagers, "Wow, aren't we're so lucky that we were born into this church because it's the correct one." And
Yeah, that's so
thinking, "You're
funny.
right. Oh, wow, we would have been so screwed if we had been born into a family that was going to, the more EV free denomination church across the street. literally. So,
Yeah, that's so funny. To also because like the thought doesn't come to your mind right after that. Well, wait a second. What happens to the person who wasn't born, isn't lucky, wasn't born in this family or whatever? We just don't think
right,
about those things when we're in the middle of it.
right. Right. I definitely, well, I do have a really strong sense of empathy, which would be exploited, and we'll probably end up talking about that a lot more in this episode. But
Yeah.
I
So,
mostly felt bad for people who weren't born into any indoctrination, any church.
yeah,
Again, with that
yeah.
missionary story being my favorite story growing up, my favorite book.
So I think I read a little bit from, or I read in your email that there is a missions kind of pull, and I think that's probably what you're getting at with like your heroine as a young girl was this Scottish missionary, and then you have this kind of compassion for people who didn't know the truth. So when did that start to develop in you, do you think?
It was a part of me during my entire childhood. It became more intense as I grew older, as you're, told to start choosing your career and college path.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so isolated. I definitely want to talk about also being homeschooled
Oh yeah, yeah.
for a bit. So I because of the Great Commission in the New Testament being taken so literally and so seriously by my church and by my family. And the Great Commission, for those who might not know, it's a part of the Gospels. I think it is mentioned in at least three of the Gospels, um, where as Jesus is ascending back up into heaven for apparently the second time, he says, he says, "Go forth and make disciples in my name." And basically dedicate your life to this calling to evangelize.
Yeah.
And I had a very strong fear of hell from a very young age. And I remember specifically when I was 4 years old, my mother pressuring me to ask Jesus into my heart. I was asking her some questions about it because I definitely did not want to go to hell if I died young.
Yeah.
I was I knew I was told it was a physical, geographical place where I would be tormented and separate from God and in the dark and on fire. And
So
I
horrible.
was also already very seeking of approval. I wanted to please all of my authorities and God, my parents, pastors, any adult I knew.
Yeah.
That was always an inherent part of my personality. So she wanted to pray with me right then and there. And I always had a little bit of an independent streak. And I said, no, not right now. I'll think about it. So I think within a few weeks, I did it on my own, quote, on my own, as if it was really this
Yeah.
individual choice disconnected from manipulation and pressure. But
Yeah.
I
Wow.
did, say the prayer. And I always remember feeling lucky that I recalled actually doing the sinner's prayer because my church ended up becoming more focused on a lordship salvation theology, which is essentially started by John MacArthur,
Oh. Okay, like
who,
the author, contemporary author and
yes,
pastor.
and
Okay.
he believed in a very works-based salvation. So you have to constantly prove your salvation, and if you're not able to prove it, then you are not actually saved. And you could
Interesting.
potentially lose your salvation at any time. And they took it so far at would take it so far as, and many of my pastors took it so far as, children cannot be saved because there's just no way to prove that they're going to last, that
So
they will end
their
up being Christians as adults.
so their fear is that kids at a young age, or what they would believe is like if kids die at a young age, they will go to hell.
So that's a very interesting point that I had forgotten about. That was a murky area of their theology. I think by the time I left that church when I was a young adult, they were entering into this, at least some of the pastors were entering into this mindset that, yes, children could go to hell because there's no way to prove that they were uh, really saved.
That's just unbelievable. I just can't
I
even.
know.
I mean, I
Yeah.
know
And
those types
so
of theologies exist, but just hearing it again is like, ah.
Yes, it's terrifying and
And
it's
it accounts for the
disgusting.
pressure that you are getting from your parents and from the people in your church. It's the way that they thought, and so there's this like urgency to save you, even at 4.
Oh, yes. And that was a pressure that my parents were receiving from their peer group at church.
Yeah.
It was a very, I can't stress enough how much of a close-knit community it was back then. And then that pressure did overflow into education. So it was a very anti-public school social environment. So
Okay.
by the time I was ready to start kindergarten, my mom felt it would be best to homeschool me. Um, and she had already been teaching me how to read, so I was already quite literate. And I started kindergarten when I was 4 years old. And we had a group at church. We would meet once a week at least to do music and maybe gym, but nothing very academic beyond that.
Okay, so this is like when the homeschooled families will all gather together to kind of have that school environment, so to speak.
Yes, we called ourselves, we had an acronym. We called ourselves an academy. And it was very musically oriented. My mom was a choir director and did a lot of our theater and plays. And in fact, I will mention that my favorite memories of my childhood are being in these musicals and plays and performing solos.
Oh,
So
that's
that
cool.
was a more positive aspect of my childhood.
It's nice when you
I
can pull those things out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was just one part of my personality, acting and singing, that I'm grateful I was able to express that,
Yeah.
even though all of those, of course, all of those plays were just re reinterpreting all of the theology we were being fed.
Right.
A lot of the plays also were just reenactments of like Old Testament stories or even New Testament stories. So,
That's really, yeah, that sounds typical, of like a Christian church or homeschool group or something, yeah.
right, right.
Well,
So,
yeah, what else went on with the homeschooling that made an impression on you?
so I always say if I had 9 lives, I would spend one of them taking down homeschooling as a lobbyist
Wow.
because it is not, even to this day, to my knowledge, it's not well regulated. Um, I'm not saying that public education in the United States is in any sense, a golden standard. It's thoroughly broken. I say that as a public school teacher. However, in homeschooling, especially religious homeschooling, there's almost no regulation. And my experience in California in the 90s, the only regulation in place was an annual state exam that would land you in the percentile scoring on about 4 different subjects: math, reading, comprehension, maybe some writing, some social studies, and math. I don't know if I just mentioned math, but
Yeah.
so, and to my knowledge, there wasn't a lot of consequence. It's not like they were flagging kids who were not reaching, the average 50th percentile for those state exams. I know that a lot of my peers had learning disabilities and they were not being taught how to read and they were not being serviced properly by their parents.
Wow.
Most of the moms were stay-at-home moms, so dad, and including my family, my dad was gone every day from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And by the time I was about 7 years old, and by that time I have 3 younger siblings, and they had all been born by the time I was 6. So
Okay.
there's 4 kids, 4 of us kids, very close in age. My mom was struggling with pretty severe mental health issues and was starting to develop addiction
Hmm.
to alcohol and painkillers or other types of drugs.
Yeah.
So, prescription drugs. So, my homeschooling experience, it really breaks my heart. I get emotional about it. I was such a driven kid. I was so
Yeah.
smart. And I was so bored. I only had 2 books. I had a spelling book and a math book. And at the most, I would maybe do 1 hour, maybe 2 hours of work a day, if any.
Wow.
So I spent most of my time as a child just playing with my dolls or playing with my siblings or fighting with my siblings, I should say more accurately, while my mom was in bed. Or she would want to go shopping, and we would go shopping with her and be bored. doing that.
And that just
And
comes with the homeschooling. So like if she needs to do chores, like then the learning gets interrupted.
oh yeah, I remember, it's triggering so many interesting memories. I remember going to we would go to the grocery store once a week, of course. And I remember being so embarrassed. Adults would always ask, "Why are your kids with you? Why aren't your kids in school?" Strangers would come up to us and ask that.
Interesting.
And she would, rebuff them. But I would think to myself, yeah, I should be in school. What am I doing at the grocery store, at 11
Yeah.
a.m. Thursday? I should be in school.
Yeah.
I had neighbor friends who when they would get home from school in the afternoon, I would beg them to do their homework for them because I was dying to learn anything. I knew I was getting left behind
Yeah.
education. And
How old were you when that awareness began that you were
about
getting behind?
about third or fourth grade.
Wow. So you just knew at that age that like I'm getting behind, and you had this drive, like you said, you were driven to learn.
I was realizing by that time too, by the time I was about 8 and 9 years old, my mom started, and my dad as well, started to severely abuse me.
Hmm.
And I knew that something was very wrong in my family. I wasn't getting adequate attention. I wasn't getting an adequate education. So and I've always had a strong intuition. So and very outspoken as well, which got me into a lot of trouble. So yes, by the time I was 8 or 9, I was aware that educationally I was uh, just left to in the dust, basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That these other kids were going to school and they were getting more education, and yeah. Um,
yes.
well, how did things develop from there as you grew older?
So I I was also involved with Awana, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. So I guess a lot of my brain space was being taken up memorizing verses, and I was taking my religion very seriously. Our church was interpreting the Bible in a literal historical sense. We believed in the inerrancy of the Bible. So as I became a teenager, I was so devout and willing to do anything to be a part of my church community. And as my parents became increasingly abusive and physically abusive, verbally and emotionally abusive, church was a safe space for me, even though there were different abuses going on there, which I'll talk about. Um, at least I felt safer. And that's where my friends were. Especially when I was homeschooled till the 6th grade. So before I went to public school, um, church, in some ways, it was a safe haven away from this other prison at home.
The homeschooling. Do you know why your parents stopped homeschooling you?
You know, well, one of the main reasons was because the public school district built an elementary school like literally next to our house.
Oh my gosh.
So convenient. And I think my mom was able to recognize, or maybe my dad, I don't really know. I actually don't talk to my parents, so there's very little I really know
Yeah.
about what they discussed to themselves. But they decided that this was not going to last. And they had made it clear to me growing up that they didn't plan to homeschool us through high school. So I knew that I'd eventually be going to high school.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, they decided that we would go into public school a little earlier because the school conveniently was down the street. And I think my mom realized with her mental health issues that she was not fulfilling her role.
When
She
did
would not admit that, or
Yeah.
she didn't admit that to me ever, but I think that I would assume that's where they were coming from.
When did you start I keep saying becoming aware, so sorry, but
That's okay.
when did
That's
you
okay.
yeah. When did you start becoming aware of like I mean, if there's physical abuse, obviously that's really clear. But when did you start becoming aware of like all of the abuse, like the emotional abuse and things like that?
Hmm.
Because sometimes kids just internalize it like I'm bad or whatever. But when did you start realizing like something was wrong?
Um, that's such a great question. I fervently journaled since the age of 7, and I still have all of my journals and diaries. So the process and exercise of writing out things that would happen to me during the day helped me recognize, as I processed it, that something was wrong. I remember specifically a friend came over to my house to play with me, and she said to me, "I'm afraid of your mom."
Oh, wow.
And I felt so embarrassed. And I realized, okay, this isn't just affecting me. Other people don't want to come to my house.
That's
And then,
crazy.
yeah, and then the same neighbors I was mentioning earlier, two neighbor girls I was friends with who were not raised in religious homes and were going to public school. The ones I wanted to do their homework, those same friends, they were very concerned about my safety. And this is when we were all about 9 years old, 10 years old. And
Yeah.
I remember one of them saying, "I want to call the police. I'm going to call the police." She was so worried about how I was being abused. Uh,
Wow.
and
Because
I
you
said,
could confide in your friends, and so they probably knew more than most.
yes, thankfully I could confide in my friends and my siblings. My siblings, we were so close in age. So even though I was treating them often the same way my parents treated me because I had these control issues that seriously regret, but can't go
Well,
back
yeah.
and relive my childhood, unfortunately, but or fortunately. But um, my sisters were a little more, at least my sister closest to me in age was aware of what was happening. I definitely received the brunt, the full force of the abuse because I was immediately this black sheep, this scapegoat that got blamed for everything. And I was the most outspoken, so I was the most punished if I said anything that disagreed with my parents, or I would often try to step in and defend my siblings if they were getting abused. So that would
You're the
result in extra
oldest.
consequence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so um, I was always, I think I honestly don't remember not being aware. I didn't know that the word abuse was what I should be terming this experience until I was in college.
Yeah.
But I at least knew something was wrong. But at the same time, and I know other people on your podcast have talked about this, you're hearing this message at church: obey your parents, the fifth commandment of the Ten Commandments. You know, God gave this law to Moses. This is the law. It doesn't matter that your parents are fallible. They're sinners too. But you still have to do everything they say. Respect them 24 hours a day.
So
They're
confusing.
it's the most manipulative thing. It's still very upsetting. And adults did know at church that I was going through this abuse. And I remember one specific youth pastor calling me into his office because my mom had been trying to get him involved to complain about me. Eventually, I should say, I realized my parents have narcissism disorder and borderline personality disorder,
Oh,
which is a
wow.
very specific type of mental health issue. So, um, a part of that is, you know, turning the victimization around on, it's, this daughter of ours is evil and disobedient. So even my youth pastor said, "I know you're a really good kid. You follow every rule to the T. So I have a hard time believing what your mom's saying to me, but you still have to obey her." And I remember
Gosh.
just sobbing in his office. I think I was about 12 years old. I was so embarrassed to be in the office and be confronted and sensitive to criticism, but
Yeah.
just realizing no one was really going to step in and help me. I had maybe one grandparent and one aunt who would try to relieve that pain and time with my parents, but
Wow.
for the most part, people were not really going to be an ally to me during my childhood.
Yeah, that's really hard, and like you said, like there's not a whole lot of people around you when you're that age, other than your friends who are also pretty powerless when you're younger, to step in and stop anything.
Right. And then in some ways it brought me closer to my concept of God because he's this parent, he's this father who unconditionally loves me. At least at the end of the day, God knows I'm a good person. God loves me. So I think it influenced my spiritual relationship.
So it sounds like at that point, like as you grew older, you kind of gravitated toward becoming more devout and more like becoming a better Christian, things like that.
I was a very uh, self-righteous approval junkie. I wanted the approval of authority so badly to counteract the approval I was never going to receive from my parents. I got pretty much straight A's all through school, despite being so behind academically, I should say, and not a strong work ethic either after my homeschooling years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I did everything I could to please the adults in my life. I wanted to be loved so badly. I wanted to be valued and appreciated and noticed, in a positive way noticed. So
Yeah, yeah. And as you
yeah.
got into high school and stuff, did how did your faith play out? How were you showing that you were a Christian? I mean, we all try to, Christians try to do the right thing and act in the right way. What were the ways that you were kind of manifesting your Christian faith?
So, oh, I just love your questions,
Oh.
making me remember all of these things.
That's good.
Well, two answers to that. One, at my public high school, I went to a huge public high school, probably the most populated one in Fresno, California. And they had two Christian clubs on campus, so I was members in those. In my social circles, I was mostly friends with Mormon girls because they were interested in the same things and not interested in all the naughty things that other teenagers were into, drinking and sex and whatnot. So I had a few Christian friends, a few Mormon friends at school, and it played out. Even though it was a public school district, it was still in Fresno. So it was very conservative and right wing leaning. I only had a handful of teachers in high school who were Democrats, probably. And I loved those classes. But anytime there was a project where we could choose any controversial topic, I did a speech about why prayer in school should be legalized. The most shameful thing I did was a huge presentation on being pro-life. I had met Roe from Roe versus Wade.
Oh
She gave us
wow.
a talk at the church in my town, because she converted to Christianity after that whole debacle in court in the
That's what I had
70s.
heard. I'd heard rumors about that. So it's true, it
She,
sounds like.
oh man, what that, honestly, I really don't like to say pity, but I have a lot of sympathy for that woman. I think she felt so demonized by religion that she decided to join it and
Wow.
become this example of, look how God changed her and her heart. And she claims, and this might be true, like that she was taken advantage of by these lawyers, and used as an example to promote, this pro-choice movement in
Hmm.
court. So yeah, she was at least then she was an evangelical Christian, and she had a yeah. I don't remember too much about that presentation, but I was excited to meet her, and I had her sign my program, and that was right. I think right after I had given my presentation. So I was definitely I was that person. This is so humiliating, but I was that person in high school who was just, standing on the soapbox pedestal, like the moral voice of my millennial generation, like, for sure, how could you do this? And my mom had been very involved in the pro-life movement. We did like walks for life. I have a really uncomfortable memory standing on a main street in my hometown when I was really little, holding up a poster like honk if you believe abortion is murder. And so yes, in those ways I did go out on a limb, even socially and academically in high school, to promote my Christianity, to promote my faith.
Yeah, it can be hard sometimes thinking back on those moments. I mean, I had, I think back on moments where I wore like a Jesus T-shirt or gave a
Right.
presentation actually my freshman year in college on why the country should, was founded as a Christian country. This is at a public university.
Woo! Woo!
So yeah, we think
Jeez,
back on these
that's pretty
moments.
bad.
I know. What's funny is my professor was Jewish, and he was it was a debate. It was like a speech class, so he was all about like just put it together correctly and make your case, and he let me do it, and I think he was a good instructor in that sense. But yeah, so I empathize with what you're saying, like looking back, going, oh, forehead slap.
I know. Oh man. There's more even with that because we were, well then yeah, switching over to how I showed this, devoutness, I guess, devotion
Mm-hmm.
at church. My youth pastor, my high school pastor, started getting very excited about Kirk Cameron and the Evangelicalism Explosion program,
Interesting.
which is, if anyone doesn't know about this, I do recommend Googling in order to mock Kirk Cameron, who is a D-list Hollywood actor. He was on the show Growing Pains, and he became an evangelical Christian, or maybe he was, I don't know, before, even
Yeah.
during his time on that show. But um, he was seen as this like really hip, cute guy who is helping this movement grow. And so we started on weeknights, and I continued this through my early college years until I moved away. We would go so embarrassing. We would go out to the mall or any outdoor shopping center and roam the parking lots or roam the aisles looking for people to confront, just kind of manipulate them into a conversation and tell them, have you broken the Ten Commandments? If you've even broken one of the Ten Commandments, therefore you're a sinner. If you're a sinner, then according to the Bible, you are going to hell. Do you want to not go to hell? Here, say this prayer with me, and you're good. Total
It's
numbers game.
so simple.
So easy. And so, speaking of the forehead slap you just mentioned, that's number one for me. That's just like, I don't even know how many strangers I encountered during that time who, I either was just annoying in the least, but at worst, I did, quote, convert a few people. I was very proud of it. You always wanted to, when you would drive back to the church, report back, all of your successes. So I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
lot of exaggeration going on, but
It's interesting because now we can look back and go, well, how many of those people who converted were just doing it to be nice, or
right,
um,
they get away from me, creep. Yeah, bless,
um,
bless their heart.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a part of that started becoming a big part. And once I went through that program, I became a leader and was training the middle school and other high school students to do it, which is, again, just forehead slap. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Unlearned that by now. So that
So
was a part of my high school time. And we would go to summer camp at Hume Lake. Hume Lake is a very fun place up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. A lot of attractive people, a lot of good bands, a lot of fun outdoor activities. So that was always a huge part of my Christian journey as a teen, was going to camp. Um,
camps were always fun. I mean, they always had fun activities and things,
right,
aside from the religious stuff. But
right. I do have good memories with it, but it also, encouraged this like hyper emotional, like recommitting your life to God and starting over. And you're just, you're on this treadmill, like, keep messing up,
hmm
always feeling, does God really love me? Am I really saved? Better recommit again. Better, ask for salvation again. Every June.
yeah, and it's also, oh, what?
Oh no, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's like reminds me of the John MacArthur stuff you were talking about, and I think I had a devotional, like daily devotional by John MacArthur. So there was that kind of strain in my Christianity where you felt like if you sinned, you have to ask for forgiveness because like you're kind of putting your salvation in jeopardy. I don't know if I thought I would go to hell if I had sinned and didn't ask for forgiveness, but I was pretty
Right.
close to believing that if I didn't. I mean, I very much was like, if I sinned, I need to ask for forgiveness right away. I need to repent, turn around. It's just this constant, I can't screw up, but we're humans, so we do things we're not supposed to. Then we end up having this paranoia.
Right. That anxiety of, I can't wait till the next communion during the church service to like recant all of these actions that I regret. And I'm remembering just the anxiety of, I would pray almost every night before I fell asleep as a child and teenager, trying to cover all my bases. Like, what did I do? What did I say? And then also, I was so empathetic and in a lot of ways codependent. I've had to work on my codependency as an adult, but so worried about the homeless people, the homeless animals, war, victims of every possible tragedy, just praying and praying and praying and praying and praying until I fell asleep. It's just exhausting.
So you said you decided to go to Moody Bible Institute. What went into that decision for you when you were in high school?
So during high school, my church became even more focused on this literal interpretation of the Bible and the Great Commission. In high school, every spring break, our church would partner with, I don't know if they still exist, but Caravan Ministries, and we would spend our spring break in in Tijuana, Mexico, building shelters for impoverished families. And by
Okay.
shelters, I mean the most pathetic sense of a shelter. It's nothing to brag about, but we were very boastful of all the good things we did
In Tijuana.
for
You
for
said
the
that was in Tijuana.
people. Yeah, so by high school, I was getting that white savior complex ingrained into my thinking, and I felt very useful doing these short-term mission trips, and also horrified to see real poverty for the first time
Yeah.
because again my church was very middle upper class on a the quote good side of town, so I didn't have a lot of interaction with like severe poverty. I always felt like I grew up poor, but that's because of my parents' abuse. They deprived me and neglected me of material things or even food sometimes. I did suffer in my own ways, but I definitely had a lot of privileges. So that was eye-opening, and I was starting to think about missions. And then during one of our trips, I think it was my junior year of high school, a spokesperson for New Tribes Mission visited our church youth group and gave a very influential motivational speaker. He convinced almost the entire senior class of our youth group. And by this time, our church was growing into a mega church. So we were very, very large, big numbers. And he was convincing everyone to not go to college, to instead go to this training center for New Tribes Mission. And it was such an uproar in our church. A lot of parents complained because they had their kids considering, not following through on scholarships and
Oh man.
college plans. I was a junior, so I still had a year to consider my options. And my parents were not encouraged because I was a woman and because I was also just not loved by them. They expected me to go to college, but they weren't going to be helpful in my journey academically.
Like
So,
you
and
need to do this, but you're on your own, kid.
yeah, they were not helpful and they were really out of touch with the way things, the internet was still new, but it was, everything was online and we didn't even, we had like the worst internet, like dial up. Like we were the last people to get like cable internet. So, yeah, it was just, I was really on my own for future plans. So, um, what happened was, I think when I when I graduated high school, I only applied to one college and I didn't know how to do it properly. So I didn't get in.
Oh
I made
no.
a ton of mistakes on my application. I didn't get in. I was devastated. I didn't have a backup plan. So then I scrambled to try to get into this training, this brand new training group at that Hume Lake Christian camp up in the mountains. It was like a 1 year program for young people who didn't know what to do with their lives. I got rejected from that,
Oh
which
wow.
was shocking. But my pastor told me, he thinks it's for people who are really messed up, and I wasn't messed up enough to go there.
Oh.
But I also found out later my parents had written them a letter kind of sabotaging me behind
Oh.
my back,
Wow.
saying, our daughter is horrible. You have to take her into your program and get her out of our house. And
Oh my
yeah, so
gosh.
the multitude of factors landed me not there. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to go to community college, which is affordable, start getting my associate's degree. And then I went, the big change, which is I'm finally circling and getting to answer your
Yeah, no,
question.
that's okay. There's a lot there.
I'm so long-winded.
No, you're good. Well, that's why you're on the show. That's good.
Hey,
We
oh, we
want
have
you to
time.
talk. Tell your story. Yeah, that's good.
Thanks. So when I was 18, my my friend's dad, one of my closest childhood friends, her dad had been going on these short-term mission trips to South Africa. And I had cousins who were Southern Baptist missionaries in South Africa. I'd only met them a couple of times because they were, when you're a missionary, at least traditionally, you come home on what's called a furlough, usually every 4 years. That's changing nowadays, but traditionally, You would be on the field for 3 to 4 years and then come back to the States for a year, travel to all the churches giving you financial aid, and just remind them that you exist and you still need their money.
Yeah.
And tell them about all the good work you're doing in your colonization,
I
I would call
remember the
it.
missionaries coming to our church, and I remember like we knew them by name, and we wouldn't see them very much, but we knew they were missionaries, and they would come back, tell their stories. Yeah.
Yes. So, my cousins, I always was really fascinated with them because here's this like, they were from like the South, from South Carolina or Tennessee area. That's where my maternal grandma's from. So, I remember they kind of had Southern accents, but they spoke Xhosa, which is that clicking language in South Africa. And I was fascinated. I realized, like, oh, I really love languages. And my dad is a bit of a linguistic nerd, and I inherited that from him. So I started getting interested in linguistics, and I was always interested in other cultures. By the time I meant to mention earlier, by the time I went to public school, I was so happy to meet people who weren't white. My very first friend in 6th grade was a black girl. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so great to meet someone who's not exactly like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had definitely been raised with racist ideology, especially from my mother. In California, a lot of the racism tends to be focused on how the Mexicans are taking over the state of California. When we see now, many years later, how that's playing out with,
It's still there.
Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, um, anyway, so yeah, with this kind of racist background and ideology in the back of my mind, I was super interested in going to South Africa, and I thought, this is crazy. Who am I? But people encouraged me to go. My parents were okay with me going. I was living at home sometimes. They would kick me out, and I'd have to live with my grandma sometimes. They would just blame me for really random things.
And they kick
Like
you
my
out.
sister, yeah, one of my siblings was getting into like, I think one of my sisters was drinking or smoking weed, and they would blame me, which is hilarious because I had never done any, I had never broken a rule in my life. So,
Oh my
uh,
goodness.
yeah, so I was just always a scapegoat, and a lot of with borderline personality disorder, there's a lot of triangulation happening. So they were really making an effort to isolate me from my siblings, and unfortunately, they were very successful in that. As adults, we're not close. So
I've heard the term triangulation. Does that just mean what you said? Like they're trying to kind of isolate different members of the family so they don't kind of work
yeah,
together or something?
exactly. It's about building allies and making sure no one creates an allyship against you, the parent. And a lot of BPD is rooted in fear of abandonment. So, you don't want your kids to abandon you, but you're going to threaten to abandon them constantly. And a lot of their abuse toward me was, you know, pulling the car over and telling me to get out of the car in the middle of nowhere.
Oh
We're leaving
wow.
you here. So I had pretty severe abandonment issues, which again brought me closer to God because He wouldn't abandon
That's
me.
what
There's
happened.
so
Yeah.
many, Bible verses about God never abandoning you and never leaving you, and those were my favorite verses. I really meditated on those. I
Wow.
did feel loved by God in that way. So anyway, I kind of got on a
Yeah.
tangent there.
No, I
Sorry.
ask you. Yeah, no, it's okay. I kind of led you off the path there. So.
Okay, it's okay. There's so much to say, but yeah. So when I was 18 and in community college, I went to South Africa, and it changed my life. It was the most beautiful place I've ever been. I met very kind people. Of course, if anyone knows anything about South Africa, they went through apartheid, and there's a lot of segregation. The White Dutch colonized South Africa, in the last 300 to 400 years. So we were working with a church that was mostly White Dutch, the offspring of these colonizers.
Yeah.
And then we would run these camps for the Black South African youth who are very deeply impoverished and disadvantaged, marginalized.
Wow.
And but being around so many different cultures, being around so many different languages. In South Africa, they have 11 official languages. It was just I was in love. I was completely infatuated. And at the time, there was someone who was interested in me. I had not, I should have mentioned too, I kind of skipped over the whole purity culture stuff, but I was very ingrained in that, starting to become very obsessed with that because I had no experience. It's very convenient for me to be self-righteous about my purity.
That's probably
I
true of a lot of
became,
people.
right? I remember I worked at an ice cream shop. I spent my entire income on Elizabeth Elliot books and
Oh
other
man, I remember her,
literature
hearing about her.
about why I'm better than everyone else because I don't have sex yet. Yeah, there was someone interested in me, and I realized when I got back from South Africa, there's no way I'm going to stay in the States. There's a whole world out there. This town is too small. There's too many people I'm trying to get away from, including my parents. I got to get out of here. This is my ticket out. I'm going to be a missionary, and I'll be heralded as a hero. Like, it's the best ego boost in Christian environments. You're
Yeah.
willing to do something most people aren't willing to do. And I've always had that adventurous spirit. And then going back to that book I loved as a toddler, I'm like, I'm going to become Mary Slessor. It's all coming full circle. This makes so much
Yeah,
sense.
that's a strong theme in your life.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I wanted the attention. I also took the Bible very literally. I'm like, I have to follow this great commission. Again, going back to like the New Tribes Mission Organization, they were very adamant about that, and so that influence was behind me a bit. So I decided I am going to go to a mission training college. I went to something called the Urbana Mission Conference in Urbana, Illinois, when I was 18. It's run by InterVarsity, which is I
Okay.
think they're based on college campuses. It's a Christian organization. And InterVarsity Press is a big publishing company, I think, in Christianity. So InterVarsity ran this conference. They run it, I think they still run it every year during Christmas break over New Year's. And I went into this big gymnasium and they had all these different tables set up promoting different colleges and universities. And I found Moody Bible Institute. It was the only one that appealed to me. I had never heard of it. Anyone in the Midwest has heard of Moody, but I'm out in California, so far away.
Yeah.
I had already been interested in Biola. It was too expensive. Master's College, which is John MacArthur's college that he was the president of. I had already done an interview there, and during my interview, the Lordship Salvation Theology came up, and I was asked to prove I was saved by my works.
Whoa.
And I spent the interview listing all my good deeds, which felt so disingenuous and uncomfortable. I thought, I can't go here.
Oh.
And then my parents at the same time were in a meeting with the financial aid offices and realizing they couldn't afford to send me there anyway.
Yeah.
But Master's College was the place to go. Everyone who was somebody at our church who was going to college was going to Master's College. If you were a woman, it was to meet your husband. If you were a guy, it was to go into ministry. Not to mention queer people. We'll probably talk about that later. And also, my church was very homophobic, of course. So anyway, I knew I wasn't going to Master's College, and Moody Bible Institute was free tuition. Like, this is
Oh,
insane. It's
wow.
in a city I've always wanted to visit because I was obsessed with John Hughes movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Breakfast Club, which mostly take place in the suburbs of Chicago, but I didn't know that. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm going to go here. And so I applied, and at least back then, because it was free tuition, they only accepted 20 to 30% of applicants.
Mm.
So I got rejected on my first try. But I was told that was very common, and the best thing I could do was keep going to a school where I could transfer credits there and finish off there. If I applied the second time, I would surely get in. So that's what I did. I found that the New Tribes mission that I had learned about in high school had a training institute. I got in within 24 hours of applying and went off to Michigan for the first time and started 2 years of biblical studies training in Michigan.
In Michigan, is that where the Moody?
Yes.
I thought it was in Chicago.
Oh, sorry. So this
Or
is New Tribes. Sorry.
oh,
So
oh,
I
oh,
got
oh.
rejected from Moody the
Yeah.
first. So I went to New Tribes. knowing that I could transfer all of the New Tribes credits into Moody when I would
Gotcha.
get to Moody the second time I would apply.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I had a purpose going to Michigan. New Tribes is very academic based. Every book of the Bible was its own class. We had tons of theology classes like soteriology, missiology, hermeneutics, of course, all the things. And one thing I loved about New Tribes is that they were very unlike my home church. My home church had grown even closer to this neo-reformed Puritan theology. They were obsessed with John Piper and Jonathan Edwards, and I found all of that jargon to be very fishy, very suspicious. I read two of John Piper's books as I was told to do by my college pastor, and like this guy's repeating the same thing over and over again. Be obsessed with glorifying God. Glorify God while you brush your teeth. Glorify God when you tie your shoes. Like, okay,
Yeah,
and
that's
I,
crazy.
yeah, Christian hedonism, I think is what he calls it.
Oh my gosh.
And they were also becoming very Calvinist. So when you're
Hardcore.
yeah, when you're obsessed with Calvinism, 5 point Calvinism, it's hard to work that into a mission mindset because if people are already elected, then there's no point in doing mission work
Yeah.
because whoever's saved has already been chosen and they're going to go to heaven no matter what. So what's the point of being a missionary? So
Yeah.
as someone who was, and I should have mentioned this earlier, I was so worried about people going to hell. My empathy was, it took over my life. I did not want, and I would truly feel responsible if anyone went to hell and I had interacted with them, which puts a lot of pressure on your social life.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone you meet, you're trying to convert. Being on an airplane, any flight, I'm supposed to evangelize to the person sitting next to me on the airplane. And if I don't, I feel guilty.
Yeah, I used to have that guilt if you felt called to go tell someone about Jesus or say something to someone and you don't do it, then you just feel like, oh no, I didn't answer God's call, you know?
Right. So there was that going on. And it was so nice to be away from my church in Michigan because the theology at church had also become this obsession with you are a dirty, rotten sinner and God hates you. And there was no message of grace or love anymore. And that was so wounding to me as someone, again, being so abused by my parents and having really no love in my life at all. Um, I should mention too, the only people who really showed me a lot of love were kind of predatory men.
Mm.
Always had an issue with married men giving me special attention. That was very, looking back, very inappropriate.
Yeah.
Very close to the level, or if not assault itself. So I was very messed up in the head. So I
Yeah, that sounds like a lot, you know, to have
there's
to.
a lot going on, Steve. There's so much going on. So anyway, went to New Tribes. They had a more free grace theology, which I loved. I'm like, oh, I'm unconditionally saved. I don't have to say the sinner's prayer anymore. I don't have to worry about this anymore. And one more positive thing I'll say about New Tribes before I totally throw them under the bus, I'm going to, is that because they're a mission organization, they're very wise in their business marketing. A majority, well, maybe not a majority, but a huge percentage of missionaries, not just with New Tribes, but with all the organizations like Wycliffe or Southern Baptist Convention or whoever, are single women. So they did value me as a woman. I didn't experience a level of sexism there that I would experience at Moody Bible Institute.
Interesting.
They knew, you don't want to reject or marginalize the women in your organization. You're going to be relying on them as, future employees. So
Yeah.
I felt valued in my skills. I was starting to study linguistics and church planting. I was feeling like I'm definitely in the right place. It was, again, academically driven, which I've always had that, drive to be academic and was so deprived of it. So even though the education was purely Bible based, we had a few classes on more of the logistical and cultural training, which I adored. So I loved learning about those things. So in that sense, I felt valued on campus, and in that sense, those are the parts that I enjoyed during my 2 years there. It's a
Okay.
2-year program. You get an associate's degree in biblical studies.
Okay.
So,
All right. So you're kind of paving the way for Moody. So what happened at New Tribes that or sorry, excuse
that's
me.
okay.
Um, yeah, what happened at New Tribes that maybe wasn't so great?
So, they had an extensive list of guidelines. We all lived, there were about 200 of us, and we all lived in one building. And it was very cheap to live there and go to school there because we were essentially the janitors for the school. We took care of the school. We worked in the kitchen. We did everything. So there was no personal space. Everybody was up in everybody's business. A lot of the students there were missionary kids from who had never even lived in the States before. So there were a lot of people going through transition and trauma. I made a handful of really good friends who were missionary kids from Indonesia. I'm still close with one of them today. Um, but all of these rules were suffocating. As far as dealing with opposite gender relationships, if you even hugged a boy, you could be expelled.
Wow.
And obviously,
Super strict. Yeah.
no kissing. Um, you were micromanaged. We had to do a list of chores before class started at 8 a.m. every day. So it was very militant.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not a morning person, so
So it's even worse.
I was getting up. My friends were so sweet. They would wake me up like, 10 minutes before class. Dana, you're not going to make it. I'm like, I'll make it. I'd always make sure I signed up for the easiest chore, which was like dusting or something, not vacuuming, but
Yeah, that's something you can do fast.
right. So it was just a lot of pressure. And I did have a boyfriend during most of that time. I had my first boyfriend who I really loved, but because I had been so abused as a child, I basically regurgitated all the behavior I was taught by my parents toward him. So we had an abusive relationship. He had his own issues as well. And but we had we had gone to church together. We actually had grown up together. We knew each other when we were younger. And so he was someone I really leaned on during my time there. But because we had started, we weren't having sex, but we were having a sexual relationship, I was, again, coming from this purity culture where I'd
Mm-hmm.
been very self-righteous. I was mortified. I lived in just tremors, just fear that we were going to get caught at any moment. I there's even this is a really embarrassing story, but I'm going to tell it. I think so there was a park next to the school, and in the park was a playground, and on the playground was this wooden structure. For little kids, you could go on the slide. At the top of the slide was this wooden rocket ship, and that's where we would go to like make out or whatever, yada yada. And one time we were in there, and I said, "Do you something smells weird?" He's like, "I don't smell anything." I'm like, "No, something's wrong." And he's like, "I think it's fine." But then he said, "Oh, I smell it too. What's going on?" And this is before cell phones that had flashlights, so there was no way to
Mm-hmm.
see anything going on. And he's like, let me look. And he walked over to a street light, and we were covered in human feces.
Oh no.
We think a kid from a daycare, because the
Oh,
kids from daycare would go to this playground. They has someone had an accident there. So of course my mindset is immediately God is
God is
punishing
punishing
us,
us. What a way to punish you.
covered in actual shit, and we're being punished. So that's
Oh
one of
no.
my favorite stories from New Tribes. And
Yeah,
then I knew
that's
that I
what you get
couldn't
for
tell
making out. Yeah.
anybody. If you told anybody that you were breaking a rule, they could indict you
That's
or
so
be
nuts.
pressured by the deans to indict you. So I'm like, I have to keep this story a secret for the next 18 months. And that was hard. So,
Yeah.
um, there was a lot of sexual inappropriateness on campus. The deans, especially the male deans, were obsessed with trying to find out what was going on in your sexual life, and in order to expel you. One of my friends was expelled during finals, and they didn't let her finish her finals. They tried to get her to tell in detail a story about how she either gave her boyfriend a hand job or something. So, there was really creepy, predatory stuff like that going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how much I've heard that. Like how
Mhm.
many people, like women I've talked to who have gone through like a tribunal process or like gone before like, a panel of all men and they ask very specific details and I'm just thinking like this is so creepy. It's
It is so
crazy.
creepy. And
Yeah.
I meant to say earlier too, I had grown up with quite a bit of that because in my home church in California, anytime someone got pregnant out of wedlock, they would force the woman to stand up in front of the entire congregation while the pastor read their apology letter. And I remember being a teenager thinking, this is so messed up.
Yeah.
And why are they picking on the woman? Is it because she has the physical symptom of pregnancy?
Right.
And then, of course, people would be forced to get married within, weeks of that discovery that they had gotten pregnant.
Yeah.
So I had already seen women being ostracized in that way. So during New Tribes, I did not trust any of the staff. I actually loathed them. I saw them as an obstacle to my education. I was so worried if I got expelled, I wouldn't be able to transfer to Moody. So I was very good at I became very good at lying, very good at staying under the radar. I know that the deans had this blacklist, they called it, and I was on it. And a friend of mine said, they're so worried you're going to burn down the school. I'm like, well, I might, but no, I said, I just want to get through it. I
This is
just need to get.
interesting. It's interesting to me because you had previously said like how much you wanted to please authority.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. There's something that flipped in me during that time. I feel like as I became an adult, I realized how untrustworthy authority was. And I went from being a rule follower to F this. Rules were meant to
Fight
be
the power.
broken. No one can tell me what to do. Yes, that's so interesting. And, I'll have to keep working on that in therapy, maybe. What caused that switch? But I did definitely I flipped a switch. I mean, I still would love
Well, I can
authority.
see why anyone would resist that kind of militant authority. I mean, it makes total sense. It's just interesting, like the process that you had to go through and learning that and being like, wait a second.
Right. Well, look where it got me. And that was also the time I realized, oh, I was abused. I can use that word abuse. My parents abused me. I was taken advantage of. I was exploited. Then I started realizing all the people who had treated me poorly as a child. And
Yeah.
I started to have quite a vendetta in my heart. And rightfully so. I'm not shaming myself for that. I realized that adults were not to be trusted. I did still want their approval, and to this day, I still want everyone's approval. But I struggle with that as more of a codependency thing. Um, but yes, and I think also with once I started having like a more sexual relationship with my boyfriend, I felt that I had been lied to by everyone. I was told in my college youth group that sex was not pleasurable for women. That it was my job to become a submissive wife who would allow my husband to essentially rape me whenever he wanted. Of course, they wouldn't use the word rape, but
Yeah.
that's what we're teaching us to do. We even had an entire retreat during our college youth group years before I moved to Michigan. A whole retreat where we discussed in small groups and large groups what to expect once we got married. And it was basically a training on how to be a good rape victim.
Wow.
I see that now looking back. And having already gone on some of these short-term mission trips, I realized this is not what I want for my future. And so by the time I had moved away, my church was starting to treat me like an old maid because I was nearing, early 20s, not married. What's wrong with her? So I started to also develop a defensive persona about being single. I had to
Yeah.
get very defensive. And that first boyfriend did want to get married. And I said, no, our relationship is unhealthy. We can't get married. And I had been very clear all along. I'm moving to Chicago. I am getting my bachelor's degree. It is very important to me to get my bachelor's degree. Um, and he, at times, was thinking of joining me, but he had some unfinished business in the military, so he had to go deal with that. And we
So
ended up
you
breaking.
were able to get away from kind of that like a near miss, you know.
Yes, and I will credit my parents and even my grandparents with instilling me in that independent mindset. My parents never pressured me to get married. That's one of the very good things they did present me with as a child and teenager. They had gotten married not older than most people would, which is so absurd because they still did get married in their 20s. My dad was like 29, but that's
Mm-hmm.
considered very old
Oh
in that.
yeah.
So they did not ever pressure me to get married, and they didn't allow me to date in high school. So I mean, obviously there was no chance of me getting married young. I wasn't even dating. So um, yeah, I never felt pressure to get married. I mean, I felt it in a general sense
Yeah.
from Christian culture, but from my own, at least my own family and my own peer group and my own mind, I did not pressure myself to get married.
So the new tribe school, the thing about it that was tough was just the like the strict rules and just that whole culture. Like everyone's watching you, and you have to be above reproach all the time, no mistakes.
Yeah.
But you eventually got through it. You eventually were able to get your certificate or your AA,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I got, wow, I still to this day, I'm like, I can't believe I got through.
Yeah.
It felt so long during it. Um, I wa I watched a lot of The Office during that time because I was on TV at the
Oh,
time.
that's a good show. Yeah.
And I know that's kind of what got me through that time. Yes, I got through that, thank goodness. And they wanted everyone who they approved of to move on to their mission training center in Missouri. And this is where I'm going to really throw them under the bus. I am during mission training center time, which is the last 2 years of your training before you go to the field full time. You have staff members dressing up in blackface,
Oh,
pretending to be tribal residents, and you interact with them, and they're speaking another language, and you're supposed to practice
that is so weird.
introductions. So disgusting. I mean,
Yeah.
just the most grotesque stuff. So,
I had never encountered that until like the news in the last few years. Like I didn't even know it was a thing people did.
yeah,
So weird. I mean,
and
disgusting is a better word, but yeah,
disgusting.
that's
Yeah, and
horrible.
yeah, especially in the last month, I feel like there has been just such an uptick in the reporting of and the exposure of people who participated in that.
Yeah,
I mean, it definitely seems like
that's
maybe a
crazy.
little more culturally appropriate in the South, in the white South, but
Yeah, it does
uh,
seem like it's more common in that part of the country.
right. And hey, Missouri, that's where
It's
New
getting
Tribes
there.
is
Yeah,
training. So
yeah.
there you go, I guess.
So wow. So okay. So you go to the training. You're going to be a
I
missionary. Yeah.
I declined. They were never going to let me in because the staff did not like me. But it was fine. I said I'm not going. I said maybe I'll go. Maybe I'll go with New Tribes once it's time for me to decide on a mission organization. I wasn't sure yet which organization I would go with long term, but I'm like I'm going to go to Moody for a few years and I'll be in touch basically. So I applied for Moody again. I
Hmm.
got put on a wait list, which was so upsetting because I'd already
An
waited.
improvement probably though from the rejection. It's kind of like okay, we're not rejecting you, but you're kind of pending.
Yes, it
Okay.
was yes, it was an acceptance, but I had to wait a semester. And this is a semester that really a lot of things started to change in my life. I
Okay.
had to go home and live with my parents for about 8 months. And at this point, my mom was really severely suffering from addiction and mental health issues.
Yeah. Okay.
And I had started to read about child abuse and read about narcissism, the very little that was available online at the time. And then during that time at home, I found a book at Barnes and Noble on borderline personality disorder and
Wow.
realized this is exactly what I'm dealing with. That was really validating to me. I knew that once I got to Moody, they offered pretty much free counseling. I was so excited to go to counseling. I had tried to go to therapy secretly during New Tribes, but again, if they found out you were going to therapy, they would expel you because that means you're not ready for ministry. You have too many
Oh.
problems.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's messed
I
up.
one day secretly drove to Grand Rapids, Michigan with a friend for a therapy session that it didn't work out. It was too expensive and too far away, and there was no way I could keep up those hijinks permanently. So
Wow.
I was excited to start therapy. But yeah, while I was home, I lost that boyfriend. I was grieving the loss of that first relationship. I lost a relationship with a sibling during that time. And these things, I had already been struggling with like suicidal ideation and depression for a couple of years, especially when my parents would kick me out of the house, when I would feel especially unloved by them. I was very suicidal. So I never made an attempt at suicide, but I definitely thought about it
Yeah, yeah.
a lot.
That's hard to go through that.
Yeah, it is. Thanks. Yeah, it was a. Yeah, I don't wish to go back to that time. So during all of this, I was basically working, saving money to pay my Moody bill. I was going to move during New Year's for the January semester, and I started reading about the Iraq War. It was the end of George W. Bush's term, and I was starting to become very suspicious of the relationship between the GOP and my Christian religion. So this is to me the very first part of my deconversion.
So this is like 2000, between sometime in like 2006 to
This
2008, somewhere in there.
2007. Yeah, this is
Okay. Because
2007.
I was questioning my GOP kind of Christian upbringing as well around that time.
Oh man,
Yeah.
too bad we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
Oh well,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I started reading. I was reading this blog, Stuff That Christian Culture Likes, by Stephanie Drury, who lives in Seattle, actually.
That
Um,
name sounds really familiar.
she helped take down Mark Driscoll and get him out of Seattle. So she's a really
Oh. Wow.
yeah, she's awesome.
That's
I
my
think
yeah,
she's still
that's near me,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was starting to be adventurous in looking into different blogs and articles that were critiquing Republicans and critiquing Christianity. Um, I had already felt like a radical because I was a missionary. I was meeting a lot of people who didn't understand what I was doing with my life. Um, a lot of people thought I was self-righteous, which I was. I really felt like I was better than everyone else. I could be very patronizing in a conversation. I'm devoting my entire future. I don't care if I die. I will be a martyr. I would be glad to be burned at the stake. Like I was just so caught up in my own narcissism of how I'm going to save people. But at the same time, I did have a genuine compassion and empathy for people going to hell.
Yeah.
And I did believe my theology. I landed on a theology that if a person did not have at least the New Testament, not necessarily the Old Testament, but at least the New Testament in their language, they're going to go to hell. And at New Tribes, we had been told countless stories from missionaries that were visiting or former missionaries who had converted entire tribal groups, mostly in Papua New Guinea. New Tribes mission works in South America, but in a lot of areas in Asia, in the Pacific. And I was very fascinated by those tribal stories. That's where I wanted to be at. I wanted to develop an orthography. There were all these language groups, especially in Papua New Guinea, that had never even had an alphabet. They were illiterate. I was also becoming more interested in the humanitarian side of missions, which New Tribes made it very clear that's not our purpose, that's not our point. But yeah, if you can bring penicillin to the tribe, that's great. But I really wanted to help people, not die of basic illnesses that we have modern medicine for, and
Yeah.
help them. If they could read and write, then the government of their country couldn't take advantage of them and their resources as much. So I was interested in that kind of quote social justice work. Um, so
And you're
yeah,
starting to discover all this stuff when you're at home in between um, New Tribe and Moody.
Moody,
This is
yeah,
kind of your discovering different ideas phase.
yeah, and I think um, again, thanks honestly, just thanks to the internet. I sometimes think if I had just had internet access as a child, maybe I would have deconverted much sooner.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder about a lot of us.
Yeah, just starting to have access to different literature was making a big difference. And yeah, so I went into Moody in the linguistics major under the missions department. I worked very hard to make friends. Took a while, but eventually I found this small minority of people there who were Democrats and progressive, and still have many friends from that time who have all since deconverted, pretty much.
Wow.
So we didn't know we were on our way out, but we were. And Moody was a shock to my system because I did feel like I was suddenly going 200 years backwards as far as misogyny.
So you, you, sorry, excuse me.
Problem. No problem.
You were personally kind of moving in a different direction, and then as you go to Moody, it's like, wait, this is like not the track that I'm on. Like this is going a different way than I feel.
Yeah, suddenly I'm around a bunch of white boys who want to be megachurch pastors, which I see as just a complete charlatan career, just a total like
Yeah.
business minded. I was already hypercritical of the megachurch movement. I didn't like that churches were being run by businesses. My own home church, I really started to separate from, again, because of that lordship salvation theology. I felt like they were so abusive to children. I also started to question homophobia and realize I don't want to be homophobic. I think this is wrong. A couple friends of mine had come out, and I felt more comfortable loving them than judging them.
Yeah.
And I started to read Shane Claiborne. He's an author who wrote Irresistible Revolution and Jesus for President. He was a pacifist. That part of my political deconversion was becoming, anti-U.S. military.
Mm-hmm.
I realized we're spending trillions of dollars, to commit genocide in other countries. I don't agree with that. Um, that was also when the emergent church movement started with like Brian McLaren. I saw him speak at a church in Chicago, and I was very interested in that. And just I thought churches should be in houses, and they should be small, and they should be
Oh, that whole thing.
relationship oriented. And, I started my journey into liberal Christianity, basically,
While you were at Moody.
while I was at Moody.
Wow. Was and
And
you did have, you said, like progressive friends that were at Moody.
yes,
That's
thank
interesting
goodness.
to hear. Yeah,
It
because
took
I
me about 6 months to find them, but I did find my people there, which was
wow,
life saving. Seriously, life saving.
that's
Um,
interesting.
so one thing that went down during my time at Moody is Obama was running for president, and I noticed this severe backlash among the student body and the staff that tried to say that it was about his pro-choice views. But I could see through it. This is about white supremacy. This is racism. They don't want a black president.
Yeah.
People are calling him the Antichrist. One of the most prolific professors on campus, who was a woman, very revered by all of the students, was a huge Sarah Palin fan. I
Wow.
would go to her literature class, and all she would do is talk about how great Sarah Palin was instead of teaching us American literature.
Wow.
I I was dumbfounded, and I started to question our white majority school. There is a small black population on campus. They had a club called Embrace that still exists to this day. They would host different talks or debates. One was about the term color blindness and how that is a very unhelpful and essentially racist point of view, where you say you don't see color. Um, so when Obama was running for president, two professors on campus broke protocol, wrote a letter condemning anyone who voted for him, and stuffed it into every student's
Oh
mailbox,
my gosh.
which was, I mean,
Not.
illegal in a sense.
Yeah. Shouldn't be doing that.
I was so outraged. and I talked to a few people, and no one was going to do anything about it. So I'm like, fine, I'll do something about it. So I made a big stink about it on campus. I wrote a letter to the school newspaper about how repulsive and inappropriate this was. But by the time the editor of the newspaper was also a right-wing Republican, and she kept putting off publishing my letter and censoring it, over editing it, and by the time it got published, it was way past the election. Thankfully, it didn't affect the election. The student voters at Moody Bible Institute didn't influence.
Didn't swing
Yeah,
the whole
he
state
still won.
of Illinois. Yeah.
So that was a very exciting time. I mean, I was in Grant Park where Obama was when he won.
Oh wow.
It was one of the most exciting nights of my life to
Yeah,
see
that
this
that
change.
that video, we were watching it live, and that video was just amazing. All those people in the
Yeah,
crowd, and just it was just such a cool moment.
it was. My friends and I had climbed this like wooden lattice structure in the park so we could see the big screens because they had big screens everywhere. And oh, it was just, goosebumps. It was so exciting. Not to say I'm a huge Obama fan now because he did support, drone wars in Yemen and immigration policy that we're still suffering from today. But it was a historical moment that I was so excited about. And I was so angry that there were professors on campus who students trusted trying to influence
Yeah.
the student body in a very racist way.
Did that?
So
Yeah. So then, did that kind of push you toward like questioning your faith more?
it was, not fully the faith, but questioning again authority, questioning, just refusing to take anyone at face value, still very suspicious. And again, the misogyny on campus was unbearable. Women were not called on in class. There were certain majors that women weren't allowed to be in.
Wow.
Most professors exhibited very sexist theology. The president of the school during my first semester there was also a hardcore, I can't remember the term, but not a complementarian. The one where women are supposed to be submissive wives and baby makers, but
Oh wow. Yeah. That's
it's like
very conservative.
1950s. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very conservative, and it was just so like backwards for me. Like, oh my God, what am I dealing with here? And my other most exciting story from Moody is that I found out one day that John MacArthur was coming to school. And I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to talk to this guy. I was pissed at him. I had really concluded that he was a harmful, abusive person who was directly responsible for hurting me as a child
Wow.
through his theology. So I took work off that day. I wrote him a letter about why I thought he was so harmful. He was hosting or speaking at a men's conference. So I talked to another student who was kind of a literal gatekeeper of where the conference was in the auditorium, and I snuck in. I was the only girl in the entire
Oh
auditorium.
wow.
I had to sit through this very gross male-only talk, and then about an hour later, he said he'd be willing to sign anyone's Bible. Can you believe that?
Oh my gosh.
As
That's
if he wrote the
crazy.
Bible. But
Right.
John MacArthur actually does have his own Bible. That's a popular thing for authors to do. They'll
Have
make
their
their own,
comments
like,
on it and stuff, like a
yeah, like
study Bible.
yeah, exactly. So he had a Bible. So that's really why he was signing it. But even
But
that notion
still,
of this is so gross.
yeah.
So I went and stood in line to meet him with my letter in my hand, and my hand was shaking. And it was finally my turn to talk to him. And he looked at me. He was like 75 years old at the time. He's like, what are you doing here, young lady? And I was like, I have something for you. He's like, oh, is it a thank you note? Thank you. I was like, no, it's not. And I handed it to him and just ran away 100 miles an hour down the hallway.
Oh wow, that must have been pretty intense. I mean, that's stressful to have to face people like when you're trying to confront them, especially in a big moment like that, and you're not supposed to be there. And
It was exciting, yeah. It's kind of silly now, but that was my big badass moment. And Moody was, quote, confronting John MacArthur through the written word. Yeah,
yeah,
that was that was a fun day. So Yeah, Moody was academically, it's very challenging. It's actually way more rigorous than anyone might realize. Especially the linguistics department, we really prided ourselves in being a major that was very scientifically oriented. So, and our professor is so challenging. It was hard to get good grades on his um, on his work, on his
Yeah.
tests and things. So I had to work really hard to just pass class, and this all led up to you have to do a big internship. If you're in the missions department, you have to do an internship, which is like the last hurrah to graduate and the last final step before going on the field.
Mm-hmm.
Right before I went on my internship, I my one of my last semesters, I took an elective class with a one of the only black professors on campus, and he taught preaching and communications. And I had always felt really comfortable public speaking because I had done theater and other, singing and things
Mm-hmm.
like that in the past. So I thought, well, I think I would be good at this. And people are telling me I might be good at this, and they like my storytelling. So maybe I'll try this class. And I loved it. I mean, I would nearly puke beforehand, but I loved giving sermons. And this professor was so encouraging to me, and he convinced me. He's like, you need to go to seminary. I don't know what you're doing or planning to do, but you need to go to seminary. And I had started to realize, yeah, I still don't think I'm ready for the mission field. I was kind of wanting to procrastinate and put it
Mm-hmm.
off because I was starting to have the questions, at least questions again related to financial dealings within Christianity that I thought were really shady, and the political stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I took one Greek class, but I really couldn't, because I was a transfer student. I was only allowed to be there for 4 semesters. So I was doing summer school. I was cramming as much in as I could. I was so interested in so many different subjects. So I took one class of Greek, and I thought, I really need to take Hebrew. I need to understand what this book is saying. I started to realize I don't believe in the inerrancy of Scripture.
Oh,
This
okay.
was written by men and men only, and it's just making less sense to me. In an emotional way, I was struggling with all the things that every deconvert, I'm sure, struggles with. Like, I don't go to church anymore. I had stopped going to church during New Tribes. I mean, I tried. I probably tried 10 different churches, and it just kept feeling uncomfortable. I felt like I was in a cult. Why are we singing to a God? Like, what? And I love music. I'm a
Yeah.
music nerd, but like, what are we doing? Just started to that
It
creep.
doesn't feel right anymore.
It didn't feel right in my gut, and your gut is made up of millions of nerve endings. It's the second brain, So I took my gut very seriously. I couldn't ignore it. I'm an emotional person, so I really was listening to my gut. I'm like, okay, I hate church. Don't really like praying anymore. And I don't appreciate all of this. And Moody had its own set of guidelines that by then I was breaking every rule, and very lucky I didn't get caught. Actually, I was getting pretty sloppy about
I just didn't
the way
care anymore. Yeah.
drinking, having a different boyfriend. I was doing things. Yeah, I just didn't care anymore. Wasn't as careful. So yeah, this professor encouraged me to look into seminary. So seminaries would come by and host little conferences on campus, and I was I really wanted, I'm such an elitist, or I want to be elitist. So I was like, okay, I want to go to like Yale Divinity or like Harvard Divinity or Duke Divinity. So I was looking at all of these schools. I felt like, oh, this will really like boost my credentials and my ego if I can get into them.
Would they actually come
And
out to Moody? Those
oh yeah,
schools?
Duke did. Yale, I can't remember if they came. Harvard didn't come, but Gordon Conwell came, and they
Okay.
have an affiliation with Harvard Divinity because they're both in Boston.
Oh,
You can
okay.
take classes at Harvard while going to Gordon Conwell. So that
Yeah.
was actually my number one school. I was most interested in moving to Boston.
What
So I,
about so with Moody? Like they're conservative, and my thinking, my one of the things I've been thinking as I've been talking about this is, um, Moody. Would they be okay with females becoming ministers and going to seminary?
Absolutely not. Oh,
And if
not becoming
yeah,
ministers, but again, this professor was such a
an
outlier.
encouragement. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this one professor was an outlier. I should have mentioned that. Again, probably because the only black professor on campus, well, I shouldn't say the only, one of the only black professors on campus. So he was already pretty radical in of itself. And
Yeah.
him encouraging me to be a pastor or be a minister, I was like, what denomination would be I be allowed to do that in? And I also had, in my friend group, I had even some guy friends telling me like, yeah, you should totally be like a female pastor. And I'm like, oh, this is crazy. I
So
didn't
now
know
you
this was
start to think.
possible.
Now you start to shift your focus from missionary work to more maybe I should be in the ministry.
Yes, but still pulled toward I have to I'm getting this degree in linguistics. I have to translate the Bible. That is still, yeah, I kind of have these two things battling inside of me. I
Okay.
need to stick to this trajectory I've been on for, 5 to 10 years at least now. But I'm super interested in this other thing, and I'm having a lot of suspicions and questions. So I think I need to study the biblical languages to understand what this book is even saying before I dare to translate it
Yeah.
to people who have not had access to it.
Okay. And you said you had kind of broken down. You didn't believe in the inerrancy of Scripture at that point.
No, and I again becoming a pacifist, um really leaning toward any kind of liberal theology I could get my hands on. There was a man, Bart Ehrman had gone to Moody and he had written some books. I was getting kind of into his stuff. I was always really I was starting to become very fascinated with people who had left Christianity.
Yeah.
They scared me, but I was fascinated by them.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly I graduated and I had to go on this internship. So this was like my final destination kind of. So
Mm-hmm.
I had been, again, through a random gut instinct, I had felt like I needed to go to Thailand. Could not explain why, even to this day. I just knew that that's the place where I needed to go. I have no
Mm-hmm.
idea why. So I found a mission organization, a small one. It's a global organization, but small states side office called WEC, Worldwide Evangelism for Christ. They were going to send me to Thailand. They had me raise a ridiculous amount of money that I knew was way too much. And I was already becoming suspicious of how much money is spent on short-term trips.
Yeah.
See how irresponsible that was and exploitative that could be. So I raised all this money, barely. Most people do an internship during the summers, but I had to work during the summer to pay my school bill because, again, my parents, I wasn't really having much contact with them anymore, and they were not ever going to help me financially. So I was paying my own, even though Moody is tuition free, it used to be tuition free. You still had to pay room and board. You had to live on campus.
Mm. So
So
you're still
it
still
was about,
expenses. Yeah.
it was about $1,000 a month. And there was no grace period, and you were not allowed to take out loans. You had to pay in cash every month.
Wow.
So I had to work a lot, and my grades really did suffer because of my work schedule. But I got through it. It wasn't the worst thing.
Yeah.
So I ended up in Thailand. I graduated in December of 2009, and so the beginning of 2010, I was in Thailand, and that's when I really realized that I could not be a missionary, and that this whole thing is a racist construct based on colonization, and who's to say Christianity is even the religion we should be converting people to?
What what
I mean,
what
it
what
really
about
felt.
it kind of hit you? Like, was it? Yeah. What about it when you were there kind of gave you that realization?
Now, I'll probably sound defensive when I say this, but I had already been on like 7 or 8 other mission trips. So this was not the exception. This was the norm. I know that
Yeah.
maybe some Christians would say you had a bad experience.
But
I
this was
really
just going through it one more time. Yeah. After
I
all
needed to
these.
go through this. Yes, I needed to go through this, and I needed to go through it one more time. And I was there for 2 months, which was a significant amount of time to me. Um, Basically, I arrived, and there were a few different factors. I actually was just reading my journal today to prepare for talking with you, from my time there in Thailand, and what did go wrong there, what unraveled. I mostly despised the way that the missionaries treated the local people. They
Mm,
were so verbally abusive to them. They would not share their financial resources with them. And again, I was in a rural village in northern Thailand, where there was severe poverty. families living in cardboard boxes,
Uh,
and the missionaries lived in really nice houses down the street from them. The most they would do for the local people is employ them as housekeepers, and they felt very self-righteous about how they provided that employment.
yeah.
Um, the way the missionaries treated each other. And it was interesting because the missionaries, because it was a global organization, they were from Europe, they were from Brazil, there was a couple from the States, there was someone from Germany. So they were really a multicultural mission team.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad because that helped me see it doesn't really matter where you're from. The whole thing is fucked up.
Yeah.
Like they would, because the local people did not speak English, they would talk about them in a very harmful, cruel way in front of them in English without the Thai people knowing they're talking about them.
Wow.
It was just such a blatant, gossipy, toxic environment.
So
I was
what
I was
yeah.
horrified. Huh?
What did you do then? I mean, once you realize this is not for me and I'm here in Thailand, like now what?
I started turtling. I just became like I'm an extrovert by nature, but I got very introverted and I got really freaked out. I was journaling a lot. I was emailing my friends a lot. At the same time, the director of the program there was a young guy in his 30s. He was married and had a kid, and he became very flirtatious with me and began this emotional-ish affair with me during that time.
Mm.
So that additionally convoluted my brain.
Yeah, that complicates it.
Yeah, it made everything even more complicated. There's this infatuation. He was lying to his wife to spend time with me. He convinced me to leave the language school where I was supposed to be doing my linguistic work for my internship to go to, on a side trip with him. That was really, that was just a really confusing time.
Yeah.
And I felt I just felt taken advantage of. The woman I was staying with, she was a single woman. She was a narcissist, I'm pretty sure, but she was very verbally abusive to me the whole time I was there.
Was this like a
And
missionary host? So it was a
yeah, she was like my host. Yeah, she was
okay.
like my host. They thought it would be a good idea because she was a single woman. On paper it looked great. Like, oh, I'm about 5 to 7 years younger than her. She could be my mentor.
But
But I don't know if she just hated me. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know what was going on there. Just probably some internalized misogyny,
So how long
which
did you have to stay in Thailand then? Having these feelings that you didn't this wasn't for you anymore.
it was 2 months, which sounds short, but when you're in it, it felt long. It was
And
dragged out.
were you at the point where you didn't believe in God at that point, or didn't know if you believed in God anymore, or where were you at? Like kind of with that.
I just read a quote in my journal today that said, well, at least I'm going to go to seminary and I can stall because I didn't know. I was having a lot
Interesting.
of questions. I definitely felt that this whole mission thing is completely bogus and again racist. I started to really recognize how racist it was.
Yeah.
We're
So,
not we're
mhm.
not trying to create Jesus followers. We're trying to create white people who worship the white patriarchal Yahweh
Yeah, just trying to like
to
recreate.
raise money for the white organization. Like
You
it
start
just
to see it for what it is.
yeah, it was like Wizard of Oz, the curtain's falling down and I'm really seeing how these things work. And again, I don't think my experience was unique in any particular way. I'd been on enough trips. I had again that close relationship with New Tribes Mission. I knew how they functioned and they were very shady. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but they actually New Tribes changed their name to Ethos 360 to, for one reason, be more relevant, sound more cool and hip, but also because they have a huge sexual abuse scandal
Oh,
that they've been ignoring and finally are getting to deal with.
gosh.
Yeah, of course they are.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
just
of
like
course, right?
SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, that's been in the news lately
Yeah,
too.
yeah, that's nuts. Just so
Yeah,
crazy.
so New Tribes is dealing with their own sexual abuse scandals, so they changed their name. Um, I wasn't aware of the sexual abuse scandals at the time back when I was into missions, but
Mm-hmm. So all this is
I
going on. Uh-huh.
I felt so guilty that I had asked so many people for money, and
Oh,
I
I
was
would
about
too.
to
I can't imagine.
declare. And when you do short-term missions, you're supposed to write a follow-up letter, a debrief. Like, how am I going to write this
Here's
letter?
how
And so,
I put your
like
money
these
to use.
people, yeah, thanks for your $100 bill. Like, I decided that this is not for me, and it's bullshit. Like, I can't say that to people.
Right, right. You have to fake it.
So I was pretty freaked out. Again, okay, I'm going to go back home and figure out which seminary I'm going to, and I'll just deal with it then.
Is that
So I
what
did.
you did then?
I started to, and I got back. I decided to stay in Chicago while I looked for seminaries. I became a nanny, so I was babysitting full time. Couldn't use my linguistics degree in any way. I wish I had been smart enough to get a TESOL certificate to teach English as a second language, but I actually didn't have time to double major in that. So I couldn't teach English. I was teaching English in Thailand. It was another thing the missionaries were very critical toward me, and they criticized that I cared about that. Said it's not important.
Oh my goodness. It's just one track
I don't
mind, yeah, for them.
Yeah, it just doesn't contribute to evangelicalism, I guess, in their eyes. But
Yeah.
anyway, um, yeah, I did a big trip with my best friend. We went to Yale, we went to Gordon Conwell, and then about a year later, I also went to Duke. And every time I went to these seminaries and met with their admin, I felt sick. Just thought, nope,
Didn't
this
fit.
isn't the place.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Gordon Conwell, which was my number one school, and I realized it's Moody on steroids. It's exactly Moody all over again.
Yeah.
I stayed with a young black woman, and she warned me, you're probably not going to like it here. You're not going to fit it.
Wow.
Great. Now what am I going to do? So my last hope was Duke Divinity. There was a handful of my peers from Moody who had transferred there, or not transferred, excuse me. They started their masters there, their MDiv, and they were all encouraging me to come down and visit. I'd never been to North Carolina. Sounds really fun. That Tri-City area, really cute. Um, Went down there, met with their dean or their admin, and they said, like, you're in. You just need to finish this essay about why God's calling you to this ministry or this, career.
Yeah.
Like, I can't. I have such an issue with authenticity. It's so important to me to be authentic. I'm like, I can't write an essay about why I believe in God and what I think He's calling me to do. I need to come here to find out if I even believe any of this
Yeah.
anymore. And I was so discouraged. I thought, what am I going to do? During this time is when the deconversion really speeds up. I'm in a relationship with a guy from Moody. We had been on and off again. I hesitate to give him any credit for my deconversion because he harmed me way more than he benefited me as a person. He was
Yeah.
an abusive guy and also a narcissist. But he was a few steps ahead of me with deconversion. He had graduated from Moody about a year before me, and he was getting interested in different literature. I was turned off by that militant atheist point of view at the time.
Yeah.
This is just the same dogma on the other side. It's very arrogant.
Yeah.
It's not appealing to me. I was realizing, again, I didn't want to go to church. I tried to even just go to church on Christmas, and I couldn't even get through a Christmas service without the whole, Christ's death, burial, resurrection. I just couldn't do it.
Just couldn't do
I
it.
don't feel comfortable with this. I tried a Methodist, a very liberal, LGBTQ friendly Methodist church in Chicago, and even that felt like a cult. Like, it's not working for me.
Yeah.
And I decided to engage with some of the literature and things that my boyfriend at the time was interested in, which was mainly Joseph Campbell
Oh
and
yeah.
his Power of the Myth PBS interview with Bill Moyers. Also started getting interested in astronomy, so Carl Sagan, who is a famous agnostic person who has passed away. I wish he was still alive. Um, and really, when I started to hear for the first time that mostly from Joseph Campbell's work. Every culture has a creation story, a flood story, and a sin nature. Not every culture has a sin nature story, but some cultures have like the snake in the garden story.
Mm-hmm.
It started to really unravel for me really fast. Like,
Wow.
okay, this religion is not unique, and it's not the only one, it's not the right one. This is ridiculous. And
Yeah.
starting to finally study history and science for the first time, because somehow I had gotten through all the way from kindergarten to my bachelor's degree without ever taking a science course or a history course.
Wow.
Not once. So I started to educate myself on the internet in basic, science and world history. I mean, I should say I took history classes even at Moody, but it's, Christian history.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still this like whitewashed, one-sided point of view of history
Yeah.
where we focus on how persecuted we are all over the world, victim mentality. So yeah, I basically kind of like a lot of people's deconversion. It was a few events and authors. Rob Bell's book on hell, Love Wins, huge. Read that, met him when he was doing a tour with that book. I'm like, yeah, hell, you can't even support the idea of a geographical hell with the Bible. So, and then when I do recall realizing if we don't have hell, we don't have anything in this religion. It all fell apart. That was the basis of my desire to be a missionary, so people would not have to experience this permanent, eternal, tormenting afterlife. And if
Yeah.
that doesn't exist, then what's the point of anything?
Right.
I was also becoming a feminist without realizing I was. Again, now I'm 25 and I'm not married, so that's very, shameful in this culture, Christian culture. Don't want to not planning on getting married anytime soon. Definitely don't want to marry my boyfriend. He's abusive. He sucks. So we're on and off again. So I'm realizing that I don't like the way women are treated in the church more than ever before.
Wow.
I watched not a documentary. Well, I guess it was like a
And
doc.
what year is this? Because 2010 is when you graduated, and then
Yeah, this was like 2010 to 2011.
okay, so this is really fast. I mean, all within that year, all this stuff's happening.
Yes, and
Wow.
not being at Moody anymore, having my own apartment for the first time. But
That's
for
big.
it was such a relief to not live under the thumb of authority, breathing down my neck. I had sex for the first time, realizing, wow, that's not actually a big deal. Like I was told it was such a big deal. I remember not even realizing when I had sex because it was so like inconsequential. Like it was just so natural. Especially when you're a Christian, you're pushing the boundaries, you're doing everything
But that, yeah.
and then you cross that line. I'm like, wait, I don't even know what just happened. Yeah. So
Right. I
realizing
remember
that
having
wasn't a
those
big
conversations with my wife and our pastor about like, what was okay, because he ended up not marrying us because we had sex
deal.
like
Really?
just before marriage.
Oh, you almost made it,
We
Steve.
all, yeah, I don't know what the deal was. I mean, I know what the deal was, but
Good for you. Good for you.
yeah, but then he didn't. It was like a week before our wedding or something. You know what part of it was? I signed the marriage certificate. Well, I think part of it is I was 21, and that's part of it.
Right.
You're human.
course.
Yeah,
Of
but
course.
I signed this marriage certificate, and it has like a date range. And of course, being a really literal like conservative Christian, I was thinking like we get married June 2nd, like that's the day, like it's okay kind of thing. And then I'm like, wait, May 15th to like June 15th, like what the heck? And it was just so weird. Like there's like this date range, like so technically according to the law, like I'd be good anywhere in there, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
you're
just that's
right.
kind of that was a weird thing. That was before I deconverted. That was probably about 5 years before I
Oh.
deconverted. But
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Anyway, sorry, I got off on a tangent. But yeah,
No,
I
that's so
associate with
fun.
some
That's
of
a
these
great
like
story.
mental battles. Yeah, around that.
Right. Exactly. That's a great story, though. I know sexual health is such an interesting topic when it comes to this whole deconversion
Yeah, it's a
discussion.
big part of a lot of people's story. That's for sure.
I've noticed that. I've noticed that. Yeah, really. Yeah, and it was for me. It's definitely one of my, I'd say, top 10 catalysts for leading me down this path.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say,
So we were talking about 2011. It happened really quick.
Yeah, I saw a documentary on Jack Kevorkian, who was the guy, the doctor who advocated for intentional, suicide, I
Yeah,
guess,
physician assisted, or
euthanization.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
for
what the proper term is now,
yeah,
but
I'm
yeah.
forgetting to. I feel kind of silly right now, but it was produced by HBO, and I was very moved by it. It's called You Don't Know Jack.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out.
I realized, wait a minute, God shouldn't be, or the concept of God shouldn't be in charge of when you are born or when you die. If someone has long-term chronic illness and they're in severe pain, they should be allowed to decide when they die.
Yeah.
And that started demystifying death. I wasn't
Hmm.
afraid of death anymore. As this other theology, it's always like an onion to me. Deconverting, you're just peeling back layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of theologies until you have very little left. And then kind of you get to the bottom. To me, the core is like intelligent design. Do I believe in that? Um, so yeah, demystifying death was huge for me, and not being afraid of death anymore. That was
That would help because I mean, that's a hard thing to cope with when you're not a believer or, I
mhm,
mean, at all. I mean, that's just as a human, that's a hard thing. So to kind of get
mhm,
through some of these harder concepts and harder things to cope with in life, that would be huge in helping you feel comfortable where you're at. And
mhm. And I realized I couldn't worship, but I also couldn't even give any credence to a God who is so toxically masculine, ordering genocides in the Old Testament, banishing women. I mean, now I know a lot of these Jewish customs were, you know, based on their desires for land and resources. And, women who are in their menstrual cycle had to go to a separate tent. Like, that was
yeah,
their effort to be clean, to stay clean. They had their own health concerns in their community. But that God, Yahweh, I was really disgusted by his behavior, and it was not someone I was interested in knowing.
yeah,
And one of the last strongholds for me was the Holy Spirit, because I had such a deep internal relationship with my intuition and my gut, and I had always misinterpreted that as the Holy Spirit, as was taught to me. And then I started to realize that's just me. That's just my own,
yeah.
soul, energy, whatever you want to call it, my inner consciousness talking to me. I had always thought God, or the Holy Spirit part of the Trinity, was someone who just was always looking out for me from the time my parents were really harming me. I mean, my parents almost murdered me a couple of times. It was really
Wow,
scary
that is
as a
that's
kid.
horrible. I
It
can't
was
imagine that.
intense. It was really intense. And I felt like God had saved me. And having to realize I saved myself, that that was huge.
Yeah, that is huge. You're kind of your own hero then, you know?
I guess I am, which
Yeah.
goes along with the Joseph Campbell uh,
Hero's journey.
hero's journey. You are your own hero.
Yeah,
Yep,
he's great.
all
Yeah, I really
all
like him.
heavens and
Hmm.
hells are within you. So yeah, I started to, as I'm looking into this stuff, I had a friend from Moody tell me one night that she thought, because I was merely questioning the inerrancy of the Bible, that I was going to hell. That really hurt, because that was a friend I'd had for 2 years, and I realized I wasn't afraid of hell, which was great. Once hell got kind of deconstructed for me in an academic sense, I
Yeah,
was like not afraid of it. I know a lot of deconverts have struggled, and friends
they
of mine have
do.
still struggle with
Yeah.
worrying, well, what if
Mm-hmm.
I don't have this fire insurance anymore? But I'm lucky and I'm fortunate that I don't struggle with that.
Yeah.
I was very confident that hell didn't exist once I decided it didn't, or realized it didn't. But when other people would tell me that I'm going there, I was very offended. Like, you know me, you know how committed and devout I've been, how much academic energy I've put into studying this, and very offensive.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, when you look back over your experience, now you're an agnostic progressive feminist. right? Very
Yeah,
different
that's
from,
right. Yeah.
I mean, just to name a few things, but I'm kind of drawing a contrast here between your present and former selves. So, like, that's part of what you are now. Very different from the homeschooled, missionary to be, like, gotta try to please the authorities in my life and be a good Christian, right? So those are totally different people in some ways. But there's always something when you look back, I ask this question every time. There's always something when you look back at your life that you can say, like, even though I went through this huge transition, there's something positive about myself that stayed the same. So for you, what was that thing you can look back through and like see a theme through your life, something that was always there through this big transition?
So it's such a great question. I've always been me, and by that I mean if something seemed suspicious, unethical, abusive, even though I didn't, again, know that term as a child, I would stand at the top of the stairs in our house and yell about it, knowing that the consequences were going to be severe for standing up for myself or my siblings. I've never been able to hold back. I'm very expressive. I've always been a skeptic.
Yeah,
And
so you'd said that, like, you'd speak up, like, you're the oldest child and you would be vocal, and that would sometimes get you in trouble. But that's a good quality to have, that, like, standing up for what you know is right, even from a young age.
yeah, I'm really interested in those who believe in light workers because I relate to that, where, some people believe some force, some power entity, like, brought them here, caused them to be here. Maybe I even chose to come to Earth. And I know that's getting a little too conspiracy theory probably for most people, but, sometimes I have always felt this sense of purpose, and I didn't need God. I realized I didn't need God
Didn't
to
need
feel
God for that purpose in life.
this. No, and I have always been me. I've always been an advocate for the marginalized, or tried to be. And the marginalized has sometimes been me. Now in my current work, I'm more so recognizing all of my white privileges and trying to do advocacy work on behalf, for those who are not experiencing the privileges that I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't end up going the direction of militant atheism.
Well, that's
And
good, I think.
thank you. And a lot of people have that kind of literature as the catalyst for their deconversion, and it was not for me. I did not read Richard Dawkins. I did not read Christopher Hitchens. I did not read Sam Harris. In fact, I think Sam Harris is very racist, and Richard Dawkins, especially the things they say about Islam and Muslims, I think is horrific and unhelpful and contributes to their suffering, especially at the hands of governments. So, it's probably controversial to say, but I
Well,
gotta
I
say
mean,
it.
yeah, no, I mean, you gotta, say what you believe, so.
Yeah. So I started this support group in 2013 in Chicago. We met twice a month to work through all the grief. I realized there's so many, there's all these stages of grief, and there's so many things. We lost careers, we lost finances, we lost family and friends, community. So I wanted to talk through those things, but not be controlling of the conversation. I just wanted to be a facilitator. So that went really well for about a year. Sometimes we had a great diverse group of people attending, all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, and I learned a lot. I was really grateful for that time. It selfishly helped me process as I was exiting out.
Hmm.
Especially that anger. We all have that anger, I think,
Yeah,
that
for
first
sure.
year or two, or even longer sometimes, of realizing you've been bamboozled, especially as a woman, realizing that I might get emotional talking about this, but I really believe this religion is designed to exploit and harm women and children. Going back to the whatever 5,000,
Yeah.
6,000 years ago it began. I just see time and time again in the Bible, and then in also real life experiences, how it harms children and women. And it's infuriating to me. And I still see people I know and love suffering under that in their marriages, in their churches. Breaks my heart.
Yeah. For someone who's in the middle of that, who's really struggling, or maybe not in the middle of it, but who has come through that and is just now going through deconversion, what encouragement or guidance would you give them?
I would say, well, keep trusting your gut because it's looking out for you. I would say, think about all the times in your life that you've been courageous and how you've overcome uh, suffering, and that maybe you did that for you. That might not have been God doing that for you. I would encourage them, if they're interested in certain subjects in history and science, to kind of, I don't know, for me, again, that academic route was a huge, like, um, comfort. Sometimes I just watch, videos on astronomy, and it's really comforting to me. I know it scares some people, but it's really comforting to me that we're just in this one planet, in this one solar system, in this one galaxy among billions and billions of galaxies. That brings me a huge sense of calm to my anxiety when I get really wrapped up in the minutia of my story or what I went through or what's going on in the world.
Kind of
You know
puts
that
things in perspective for you.
Yeah, the pale blue dot, um, by Carl Sagan, like
Mm-hmm.
that. So
That's cool.
yeah, and also just reach out to people. Like, keep Googling resources. You're not alone. I think that's the most important thing. You're not alone. It feels like you're alone. I felt so alone, even though I knew people who were deconverting, and I was always a few months ahead of my peers and a few months behind other peers of mine. So whatever stage you're at in the deconversion process can feel so alienating,
Yeah.
but you're really not alone.
Well, is there anything we haven't touched on that you wanted to mention?
Um, I get just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to end that support group due to, because I was a facilitator, I allowed people to talk about what they wanted to talk about, and I noticed the group became very white male driven and militant atheist, and it started discouraging people from attending the support group, and I had to end it. I felt like that was becoming very toxic and it was unhelpful to most people.
Yeah, that's not good. I know some atheist groups can get that way, or some atheists just can be very militant or just know it all and kind of angry and gonna put Christians in their place rather than being more constructive and having discussions and being more, I guess, friendly.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know why. Again, I totally understand the anger we feel in being tricked and indoctrinated as children. I do believe it's a form of child abuse, indoctrination, and you're not giving children a choice and you're causing them to be afraid of a hell. I think it's horrible. But
Yeah,
I, with that anger, yeah, I don't think we need to be condescending people who are still in different parts of the process of deconverting, or people who
exactly.
are still in Christianity who aren't ready to deconvert yet. I just it's disrespectful,
Yeah.
and also arrogant to say for sure. Like, we can't say we know any. I don't know. We can't say we know
No,
very
I
much.
think you're right. I mean, none of us can know everything or know, for sure, but, we just,
Right.
yeah, so there should be an amount of humility that comes with any belief
Yes,
system or,
definitely. I think
yeah.
humility goes a long way. So I started after that for the last like few years, being more interested in feminism, which then in turn became intersectional feminism. And that's intersectional feminism is a framework that it was developed by Black feminists, women and groups, and it seeks to like proactively include all genders, ethnicities, cultures, abilities, backgrounds, socioeconomic classes. Um, Everyone faces different types of oppression, and it's important to check your privilege. I think that white women especially suffer from white feminism, where we're discounting or tone policing the experiences of other women. And to me, my feminism is such a huge part of my deconversion process. Again, after surviving to me surviving the pressure to get married and have a husband who will rape me for the rest of my life, surviving the pressure to be a machine who makes babies for the army of God.
Right.
So I didn't even really touch on the fact that I never felt comfortable with the idea of being pregnant and giving birth to children, which is just a personal thing.
Yeah.
It's personal
But
for
it's not
everyone.
acceptable in the conservative world sometimes. So yeah, I can see
Completely
that would be
unacceptable.
very hard to, yeah.
And at Moody, my time at Moody, that was considered very unacceptable. So having survived that, it's important to me that I'm advocating, and a lot of the time that means listening and shutting up and just listening to the experiences of other women who have suffered in and outside of Christianity.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds like a fascinating journey and learning, about all that. I know for my wife, feminism was huge. I've learned a lot from her, just like, through her process. But yeah, it's an exciting thing to kind of learn and discover those things. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to strive to continue to grow. I feel like there's a temptation and deconversion to just like land wherever you land and like continue. That's still stifling to me. Like there's still so much to learn, especially as a white person. I was a part of an organization that was trying to dominate and continues to try to dominate and exploit the world. I have a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
I'm never
definitely.
going to be done unlearning the racism in my mind that I was taught.
Yeah.
I still struggle with it. Even though I am a political activist in my community, I do what I can, especially, I'm sure people know from the news, police brutality is such a big issue in the States and especially in Chicago. Our police force is basically a terrorist organization. So I'm often like, even this last week, I did it twice. Every time I see a cop pull someone over, I wait with my camera phone out, just making sure everybody's okay in case they need me to film anything. So there's, not being a Christian opens up a lot of energy and space to be doing other good things with my time in life.
That's a good way to put it.
And I did find my career path. I meant to say that too. I
That's
realized
important.
that I do want, I'm a teacher. I got my master's in special education.
Oh,
A lot of
cool.
that comes from being homeschooled and seeing so many people not get their educational needs met.
I think that's an awesome like trajectory and an awesome like place for you to have landed. Not that you're done growing and learning, but coming from the difficult homeschool and environment that you were raised in, and then to now be helping kids like that. That's great. That's really
Thank
cool.
you. It's a pleasure and a privilege. I love children and I want to protect them and just do what I can. I love that quote. Well, for me, because I'm a woman, be the woman you needed as a little girl. Be the person you needed as a kid.
That's cool.
That's what I'm trying to be.
That's awesome. That's a great quote. Well, what's the best way for people to reach out to you or get in touch with you?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is some star stuff, which is a Carl Sagan quote. SOMESTARSTUFF.
Okay. Cool.
And also, if anyone wants to like get in more personal touch with me, my email address is Dana, Dana, period M as in Marie, because my middle name is Marie, like everybody else born in the 1980s and 90s. M period Smith 85 at gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, Dana, it has been really wonderful to hear your story. And I mean, what a crazy story it was. Going from the homeschooling and then through this missionary stuff. And then just with like I forget the name of it, that 2 years in Michigan.
New Tribes
Yeah.
Mission. New Tribes Bible Institute.
Yeah. And
It was
then,
run by New Tribes Mission, which is now called Ethos 360. Yeah, a lot of names.
yeah. And then Moody and just everything. I mean, it's cool to see where you landed and like what you're doing now, and I just really appreciate you taking time to share your story and encourage other people who are going through difficult things too.
Thanks so much for this platform, Steve. Like, I can't tell you how kind and generous it is to be able to share this and not be just letting me have this long amount of time. Thank you so much. I hope it's helpful to somebody.
Oh, it will be. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast.